In a world of bland rock stars and cautious spokesmen, Robb Flynn of Machine Head stands out as one of the last true personalities of heavy metal. Outspoken, acerbic, highly talented, and never afraid to admit his mistakes of the past, nor downplay the spectacular heights of his artistic achievements, Flynn remains one of the few interesting people in the metal scene. Emerging during the second wave of thrash metal in the San Francisco Bay Area, following the success of Metallica and Exodus, Flynn began his career as the 18-year-old guitarist in Forbidden Evil, later to become the major label thrash concern Forbidden. 4 of his songs appeared on the band's 1987 debut, but Flynn had already jumped ship in 1986 to join Violence, where he appeared on the group's only 3 albums to date as the rhythm guitarist and co-songwriter. The band recorded their last album in 1990, but it only saw a release in 1993 thanks to numerous delays and a trepid record company having no idea what to do with it in the era of grunge and college rock. Flynn had offers to join Ministry as a touring guitarist to keep out of the unemployment queue, but he formed a side project called Machine Head to stay focused on his personal goals, and the rest is history. Exploding onto the scene in 1994 with their genre-defining Burn My Eyes LP, Robb Flynn and Machine Head gave metal credibility once again as a relevant subculture when the musical landscape had already written its epitaph as an outdated, unfashionable, cliché-ridden fantasy for nerdy teens and unemployable meatheads. Signed to Roadrunner Records by the heavy metal rainmaker of the 1990s, Monty Connor, the band took the streetwise image of Biohazard, the down-tuned groove riffs of Pantera, and the aggression of Slayer, and packaged these into a forceful assault of unrelenting testosterone rage and blue-collar anxiety. It resonated with a generation of Americans acquainted with the drive-by shootings and gang wars that plagued their neighborhoods and divided their towns and cities, but the band found their biggest commercial success in Britain, Germany, and Australia, where the gritty realism and macho posturing achieved its own cult following. Few people realized at the time that Flynn and his friends had a gangland contract on their heads during this period, following a knifing incident after a Deftones show. He also overdosed on heroin on the night he signed with Roadrunner Records. Clearly, this was not the heavy metal of Dungeons and Dragons, but the sound of the street, played with the technicality and precision of the genre's finest musical attributes. Having consolidated metal's place on the map as a mainstream concern following the success of Pantera, Machine Head now found themselves as the genre's biggest hope in the mid-1990s, which may have contributed to the delay of their 1997 sophomore effort, The More Things Change. They returned with 2 strong singles and a mid-tempo mix of hardcore, thrash and groove metal, but the album only met expectations instead of exceeding them. Lead guitarist Logan Mader quit not long after in a drug-fueled bust-up, and Flynn started to feel the weight of pressure on his shoulders as an appointed torchbearer of the true metal that was starting to slip out of the mainstream once again. The knowledge that he was born Lawrence Matthew Cardine to parents that gave him up for adoption preyed on his mind and led to some serious soul-searching in the writing sessions for 1999's The Burning Red. Some of the fanbase reacted in dismay to the band's pivot towards the trendy new metal sound starting to penetrate the mainstream in the wake of Korn, Cold Chamber and Deftones, but The Burning Red is the record where Flynn emerged as a gifted songwriter rather than just a riff lord and musical icon. Dealing with darker themes from his childhood, including sexual abuse, the band's 3rd album remains one of the most unsettling in their back catalogue and should not be dismissed for its flirtation with rap techniques or its bouncier rhythms. This is not a Korn tribute, nor is it new metal, but the inspiration of Prong and Helmet mark it out as a record of its time. If the fanbase could overlook the incorporation of new metal into the band's trademark groove bludgeoning, they could not forgive their 2001 disaster, Supercharger, which is a new metal record, and a dodgy one at that. The excuses for the poor commercial and critical performance of Supercharger are manifold. The ill timing of the MTV video for lead single Crashing Around You just days after the 9/11 planes crashing into the Twin Towers and Pentagon, the shrinking of the promotion budget from Roadrunner Records to concentrate on Slipknot, the decision of the band to embrace contemporary trends dominating alternative culture at the time. The truth is that Supercharger is the sound of a band unsure what they want to be or who they want to appeal to, and it deserves the accusations of sellout. How did the darlings of metal go from leaders to languishing has-beens in the space of 7 years? You could be forgiven for writing the band's eulogy during 2001, 2002, and even 2003, where they fulfilled their contract with Roadrunner Records with a live album and shot their new demos to various labels. The lukewarm reaction in the industry would have ended most bands, but Machine Head are at their best when the world is against them and their fortitude is the only thing that can see them through. Roadrunner changed their minds and signed them once again for the release of 2003's Through the Ashes of Empire after hearing lead single Imperium. This is the moment when Machine Head version 3 came into existence, with the recruitment of ex-Violent shredder Phil Demmel joining them in the recording sessions. It marked a return to form for the band and saw them reconnect with their thrash roots and the heavier groove metal stylings of their first 2 records. Now the band started to talk of their next album while still in the touring and promotion cycle for Through the Ashes of Empire, and fans and critics alike could sense that the self-belief and burning desire were back in the Machine Head camp once more. They had every reason to be excited by the release of 2007's The Blackening when it arrived. The band expunged all traces of nu metal and alternative influences from their sound and broadened their original approach into a long-form metal frenzy with heroic guitar solos, colossal riffs and anthemic choruses. Clenching the Fists of Dissent, Aesthetics of Hate and Halo are just 3 staples of the group's live set to this day, but every song on The Blackening could be included in a modern Machine Head show. Critics reacted in amazement to the new height of musical ability on display, especially the expansion of Robb Flynn's guitar chops to match the exquisite lead work of Phil Demmel. Few bands can equal an iconic genre-defining debut a decade later, but Machine Head achieved the impossible and recovered their reputation as one of the most important bands of the contemporary scene. Kerrang! And Metal Hammer named it their album of the year, and it earned a Grammy nomination as well as being chosen as one of the albums of the decade by Metal Hammer at the end of the 2000s. How do you follow up a record like The Blackening? The answer appeared 4 years later with the release of 2011's critically acclaimed Unto the Locust, which might be the hidden gem in the Machine Head discography. Clocking in at just under 50 minutes, album number 7 is the record that never fails to surprise on repeat listens, with its orchestrations and fist-clenching choruses delivering the same impact as the chunky riffing and extravagant soloing. Flynn could read the direction of the wind at the beginning of the 2010s, and followed up in 2014 with another admired album, Bloodstone and Diamonds. Original bassist Adam Ducci left the group before the recording, leaving Flynn as the only founding member, but replacement 4-stringer Jared McEachern brought a new energy to the group. Everything looked rosy in the Machine Head camp in 2016. Sales were up, stadiums were still the default venues, the band's influence on the next generation could be heard in many pockets of the metal scene. Then Flynn tried to cancel Pantera's Phil Anselmo following a Nazi salute and call of white power at a live show in Hollywood, which ought to have been a virtuous act, but ended up seeing the Machine Head frontman receive death threats from Pantera fans that persist to this day. Somehow, Flynn lost control of the narrative and appeared to be the self-aggrandizing rock star when he should have been the recipient of admiration for taking a stand against racism. He became disillusioned with the way the online metal community reacted to him calling out Phil Anselmo, and he started to listen to his hip-hop records once again. The pressure of following up on 3 successive commercial and critical albums put him in risk-taking mode and resulted in the incredulous decision to revisit parts of their nu metal past on 2018's much-maligned Catharsis LP. You know something is wrong when Robb Flynn starts to say things like, "We've been writing about the same shit for 30 years, and things were not harmonious in the Machine Head camp." Accusations of woke metal rung louder than the guitars from Phil Demmel's amps, who left the band in the wake of the release, along with longtime drummer Dave McClain. Both called it a Robb Flynn solo album and brought serious accusations of authoritarianism against Flynn, with the former alleging that he needed permission to give media interviews. People were quick to predict the demise of the band, but 2019 brought the chance of a 25th anniversary tour to celebrate Burn My Eyes. Flynn astonished the metal community with the news that Chris Kontos and Logan Mader would be rejoining for these live shows. In the meantime, he announced decapitated Colossus Vogue as Demo's replacement in a new-look Machine Head. The pandemic allowed the outspoken frontman to reconnect with his heroes and contemporaries with the expansion of his No Fucking Regrets podcast, yet he also used the lockdown to keep the fans entertained with his regular electric happy hour studio shows with Jared McEachern. Observers could see that Flynn had the look in his eyes once again and the spirit of thrash metal running through his veins. In 2022, Machine Head released the monumental Of Kingdom and Crown to rapturous critical acclaim. The heavy metal archives can now immortalise Machine Head version 4, but the future still has at least one more unwritten chapter from the hand of Robb Flynn. So whether you like him or not, Robb Flynn is one of the great survivors of the metal scene from the last 3 decades. His contribution to the evolution of modern metal is seismic. And of course, he has no fucking regrets.